The Lower South. So, I definitely would recommend before I get started on talking about this, looking at this map very carefully of what is the Upper South versus the Lower South, and notice the colors don't have to do with upper and lower. It's more about before 1800 versus after 1800. And we've been looking at the development of a lot of these states in these last few PowerPoints and everything as well. So the thing is, in the 1790s, cotton really booms in the United States for several different reasons. First of all, cotton could be planted really far inland, and it required no additional costs of like machinery or drainage system, such as like we saw with rice previously. Plus, with the invention of Eli Whitney's cotton gin in 1793-94, this is going to cheaply and quickly remove seeds from the cotton fibers, spurring cotton cultivation even more across the South. The thing is, with the cultivation of cotton, one also sees more and more slaves. Cotton cultivation was really well suited for enslaved labor because it required continuous tending throughout the year. And so the long work year basically maximized the return on capital investment in enslaved labor. Despite the time needed to cultivate cotton, though, there was plenty of time for basically those enslaved to grow food, especially corn. The thing is, the Southern diet really was corn oriented, and corn needs very little attention while cotton was being harvested, and corn could be planted earlier and later than cotton, partly because you have a long growing season, especially in the Lower South, just because of the environment. Plus, a surplus of corn could be used to feed hogs, and thus you're basically converting your corn into pork. So this link between cotton and slavery is very much at the heart of the plantation system. And we're going to see this plantation system is really going to spread west after the War of 1812, and then the preceding conflicts and stuff afterwards. Think about Jacksonian America, the Indian Removal Act, and et cetera, et cetera. We're also going to see output of cotton really explodes during this time, partly because of the fertility of this new virgin lands, but also because of like technological changes like improved seed varieties and the steam-powered cotton gin. Plantations really were the leading economic institution in the Lower South. To be a planter, you had to own at least 20 enslaved individuals. And this was really the most prestigious social group. Less than 5% of white families were in the planter class. But this planter class still controlled about 40% of the total agricultural wealth. They would included in this wealth would be those they had enslaved, as well as like cotton output. Most people, to become a planter in their own right, basically inherited it or married in. And the only way these planters could stay on top of the economic system in the United States, in the South, was by continuing to gain profits really from enslaved labor. Planters also were more likely to learn about things like superior seed varieties or progressive growing techniques. And then their enslaved had to work at a steady pace or they would feel the lash. They would be supervised by like white overseers or black drivers. Sometimes an enslaved person was picked for their managerial skills or agricultural knowledge. And so by 1850, these plantations in the Lower South are larger and more specialized than anywhere else in the South, and their wealth would be very much ostentatiously displayed. The Lower South is going to amass great wealth, but you don't see as much progress in the South because economic enterprise is really going to be stifled due to the focus is really more on plantations than anything else. And another way of actually thinking about plantations is, forced labor camps. Now, when looking at the institution of slavery, most modern studies showed that the average rate or like return on a capital invested in an enslaved person was about 10% a year. And of course, in newer regions in the lower South, where you have like the most productive land and the greatest commitment to plantation agriculture, that's going to be where they're the most dependent on enslaved labor. This is also the region that is going to lead the nation in per capita income. And so a lot of the profitability of enslaved labor really rested on the enormous demand for cotton outside of the South. In fact, demand grew by about 5% a year for the first entire half of the 19th century. Now, of course, there's exceptions to this at different times, like panics and everything like that. But generally, the demand is so strong for cotton that you see prices hold at about 10 cents a pound, even as actually Southern production of cotton doubled during this time period. So demand is keeping up with supply, and supply just doubled. This is because they weren't just selling to other parts of the United States. They were selling to Britain and just all parts of Europe. But then you have to look at the slave trade. Basically, the price of an enslaved would vary according to their age, their sex, skills they might have, and then of course market conditions. But you generally see a steady rise in prices, which means that slave owners could sell their human chattel, I should say, though that derives from cattle, basically and realize they could get profit over and above what they might have earned from an enslaved labor. You also get enslaved mothers would increase capital assets for their owners because they produce new enslaved that could be sold in the future. The thing is, after 1807, really, those who wanted to own their own enslaved had to depend on the internal slave trade for a bulk of their labor supply. It's hard to smuggle slaves into the country at that point, but the sheer size of the internal enslaved trade indicates just how profit-driven these enslaved owners were. Very few hesitated breaking up enslaved families for sale, especially when, market conditions were right. Enslaved children in the Upper South after 1820, they have a 1 in 3 chance of being sold sometime in their lifetime. And you can see, look at this map here, the arrows are generally selling slaves from the Upper South to the Lower South. Keep in mind the slave states are only like those gray states. The profits from selling this human chattel would basically go into buying more land and more slaves. You might have someone sell like the children that they owned and were enslaved in order to buy someone with an enslaved person with, a specific skill. The thing is, these slave owners had little economic incentive to shift their capital resources into other enterprises like manufacturing or urban development. And so one sees that industrialization and urbanization falls way behind the levels when compared to the free states at this time. And this is when we're going through the Industrial Revolution. And we're going to see that later when we jump back to chapter 8 and everything. In fact, if you look at it, the South had about 1/3 of the nation's population, yet they only had about 10% of the nation's manufacturing output. And this is even more so the case in the Lower South, where they have the smallest urban population and the fewest factories. A lot of slave owners really feared social changes that might undermine the stability of slavery. And they very much saw the urban environment as weakening the institution of slavery. And part of that is when you look at urban slaves, it was weakening that institution a little bit. The thing is, urban enslaved individuals might be artisans, semi-skilled laborers. They might work in domestics, but generally they usually lived apart from their owners, which gave them a lot more freedom than like field hands. They might be able to interact with each other. They might even be able to experiment with like different social roles or work for themselves a little bit extra and retain some sort of wages on the side and maybe even buy their freedom on some level. And so this does weaken the institution of slavery. And so there was that concern about urbanization and industrialization. You do also get some industrial slaves, but they never make up more than like 5% of the enslaved population of the lower South working in like manufacturing. So, as a part of your journal today, I want you to characterize the lower South in one sentence.